Todd,
Thanks, Jim. I am gonna speak behind the podium here for the sake of the video. So, it's great to be here, by the way, and it's great to be able to talk to the grassroots, because a lot of times there's a little bit of a disconnect where we can't get information to you guys that we need to get to you. So. Now's a chance to ask questions. We've only got about 10 or 15 minutes here, folks, so we'll do as much as we can. I want to talk about three things. We'll talk a little bit about screening, because we get a lot of questions about screening and volunteer screening and who mandates that and where that comes from. The Hockey Canada Insurance Program, which I oversee parts of that program. So I oversee the accidental death and dismemberment part, which are the more serious claims, the paralysis, death going to and from events, that type of thing. So, and I oversee the accident medical dental, which is really the one you're going to draw from the most. And we'll talk just very quickly about the Hockey Canada Safety Program. We get a lot of questions around the program and what the intent of the program is. So I'll start with the safety program, and I'm sure you're all familiar with it. The program's been around for a long, long time. Hockey Canada has delivered that program since 1995. It is very much, folks, a prevention program. Okay, and I think that's really important that you use that in that context. It's to give tools to somebody on the team, and reality is that a lot of times it is the coach that takes that program, because we know that in house league it's hard enough just to get a coach, right? And a lot of times, so there are situations where a coach will take that program. The ideal situation in the perfect world is that you have somebody else on the team that takes that program, and it can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people who take that program. So if somebody's not around, then you've got that other person to back that person up. We give a very broad overview of risk management. We give a very broad overview of safety management, and the two are very different. We give a very broad overview of how to respond to injury situations. Okay, and the emergency action plan becomes a huge and important part of that. You may or may not have seen the CBC program this week that came out. There was a young lad who died of SADS, of sudden arrhythmia death, in the August time period in the Canadian Hockey League. So a lot of question around emergency action plan and making sure we're organized and making sure we know how to handle situations if they do occur. And they're catastrophic when they occur, and we need to be able to obviously put plans in place in order to deal with those situations. It's not meant to be a first aid course. The first phase of the program is meant to give tools to implement planning around the team. It's recommended throughout that program time and time again, this person should take first aid. If they don't take first aid, to definitely have somebody on the team they have identified who can intervene if first aid is needed, and it's going to take a little while to get medical services on site. Okay, so very much a prevention program. Very much in the ideal world, have that other person that works with the coach, and if not, certainly the other option is to have that coach take the program. Okay, is there any questions on that program specifically? Yeah.
I know the timeframes, have that changed for the safety program? It's still for how long?
It's I can answer that because I was just next door actually in Ann's room, and you're right, it is branch driven, it's not nationally driven. We recommend now, because it's online, we now recommend every 3 years, and I believe the branch is now doing every 3 years. So it's just to keep you refreshed. Things like concussions are changing constantly. I won't pretend that we change information every year, we don't. But we certainly review it ongoing, so there are new tidbits of information that get added on an ongoing basis as the needs arise. So that's why that requalification period is there. Any other questions on the program itself? Okay. With respect to screening, we get asked quite often, who mandates screening? What do we expect as a national organization? So nationally, we have a policy that oversees our high-performance staff, so all the staff that work with our high-performance teams, our board of directors, and all our staff within the national organization. And all those people are, at this point, required to have both a criminal record check and a vulnerable persons check. Okay, and the difference between the two are the criminal record check is a basic check of the criminal record database with the RCMP and local police files. The vulnerable persons check goes into the pardoned files and will check the sexual offenses pardon database. Okay, and that database is a very complex database. It's one that's sealed. It's very private, but they do allow that during a vulnerable persons check, just because that person will be dealing with the vulnerable sector of society, that being kids in our case. Okay, so we ask for both those. The vulnerable persons check is very complicated. You have to be living in the area where you get that check done, and the Act actually says that you can only get that check, obviously, if you're dealing with the vulnerable sector. So there are situations, if you have somebody who is a volunteer who schedules ICE, is never around the kids, who's not involved, you may have a situation where that person cannot get that vulnerable persons check. Okay, so it is difficult. The other thing you'll find with the vulnerable persons check, and we've seen it again and again, where a volunteer will be asked to go get fingerprints. The reason for that is when Graham James was found in Mexico, I think there was a lot of discussion around the fact that somebody who has a pardoned file could then go away and change their name. And during a name check, that would never get picked up. So now what happens is if your gender and date of birth match a gender and date of birth on that pardoned sexual offender database, you ultimately have to get fingerprints to prove that's not you, okay, in order to get a cleared vulnerable persons check. Okay, so it is a little bit complicated. We're trying to simplify it. We work with a third party, with BackCheck. We're dealing with BackCheck, and BackCheck is dealing with different sectors within the criminal record check world, and they are trying to simplify that process, but right now that's where that process is. The policy that you deal with is the policy of your minor hockey association, and most likely based on the policy of BC Hockey. Okay? The national policy sits, it recommends that branches of minor hockey associations do similar steps. The only thing I'll finish with on criminal record checks is please don't take that it's a total screening process, okay? Because there are 10 steps within the screening process. Just make sure you're not getting a false sense of security, because there are gaps within criminal record check process, okay? And unfortunately, we can't get into them at this point, but there are gaps, yeah.
I've been asked by my coaches that have had to get fingerprinted, what
Yep.
happens with those records?
Those records are destroyed, I am told, within 90 days of the check being sent, yes. And
I
that
had no answer for them.
no, and if you need to refer them, if you go on the RCMP database and you go into vulnerable persons checks, it is noted right there. So that will give them some comfort, because we have been asked that question before, so.
What excludes a coach with a criminal record, like with a minor criminal record? I mean,
That's based on your policy. If you look at the new national policy, and it's online as well, what we've done is we've broken it down, and we've put major charges, so indictable offenses where it's automatic or could be automatic exclusion. But there are other charges where it says, well, maybe we need to look at this. So if somebody's been charged with drinking and driving 30 years ago, those are the kinds of things where it's almost good to have a committee of perhaps a lawyer, perhaps somebody in your minor hockey association who is familiar with those kind of charges, who can sit down and make those decisions. So it's not necessarily automatic exclusion. I don't think that's the intent. Okay, what it is let's look at the serious stuff, let's look at the minor stuff, and we've got to be able to separate the two of them. Okay, and if you look at our policy, we've tried to explain that really well. It's actually under the Speak Out part of our website, so you'll be able to look at it there. So,
Good question.
yep,
There's a lot of, and Bob Nixon alluded to 12-month-a-year hockey season.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of hockey that happens outside the minor hockey.
Yes.
Below.
yes,
So minor hockey, a lot of it's monitored.
yep.
So for spring hockey, summer hockey, where there's coaches doing anything, what's Hockey Canada doing to monitor that?
We're not. It's not under our policies. No, and we're seeing more, as Bob said last night, we're seeing more and more of it integrated now into our system. Once they integrate into our system, obviously, that's a different story. But, and it's the same with the insurance program, folks. You know, a lot of parents come into the summer hockey world and think that they're automatically insured under Hockey Canada. We get hundreds of calls, right? And they're not. So it's very important that parents are very familiar with the fact that we need to talk to the league who's running that summer hockey program to make sure our kids are covered from an insurance standpoint. Okay, it's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah.
Does Hockey Canada recommend that these criminal record checks go to, is it just the risk manager in the association, or do you recommend that you get an RCMP officer or a lawyer
Yeah.
within your association?
I can tell you what we do nationally, and I won't take too much more time here, Jim, I promise. Nationally, we have a counsel office, so we have a lawyer's office. We never see the checks. The checks go directly to our legal counsel. They will review the check. If there is an issue, then our lawyer will contact the identified people within the organization who will then make a decision based on that information. I know that's not always feasible, and that's costly sometimes. Our lawyer doesn't charge us, some won't, some will. But all I can tell you is to make sure that you put reputable people in place. Privacy is followed. You know the legislation with respect to saying yes and no. And that's where, as you're saying, professionals come in. There's no reason why an association can't do it. Just make sure you're putting reputable people in place that can review and make those decisions, and make sure you have policy to back it up. Okay, and be consistent. That's the big one. Okay, so if you're saying over here, well, this person was charged 25 years ago with drinking and driving, we're gonna forego that. Make sure the next time it happens that you do the same. Okay. The only other thing, Jim, was the screening, the Hockey Canada Safety Program, the insurance program.
Insurance if you're hiring an employee.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Jim asked me actually last night, do you know insurance? First of all, the insurance program, and I'm doing a presentation next door. It takes about an hour, so we don't have an hour. But basically, the stuff that you guys are covered under, your coaches are covered under. You all pay a premium every year, and that's done by the branch. Okay, it's all part of your fee process. We pay $16.15 for insurance, which is very low when you consider you're covered by our general liability insurance up to $20 million. There's been additional added to that as well if it's required, but the $20 million is really the base amount. Directors' Officers' Liability Insurance is paid by Hockey Canada, so you are covered in your associations by Directors' Officers Liability. There's no reason to go out and purchase additional Directors' and Officers' Liability Insurance. The Accidental Death and Dismemberment Insurance, where we cover for paralysis, we cover for death, we cover for lost eyes. There's a whole list of losses that we cover for. We cover at the rink, we cover directly from home to the rink, from the rink back home, and obviously when you're on tournaments and traveling as a team. And then there's the Accidental Medical Dental, which is a secondary insurance. That's the injury report form that you fill out, okay? That's all done out of the Ottawa office, and it's a secondary program, so it means your primary, so your provincial health insurance first. If the parents have private insurance, it goes there next, and then it comes to us after that for coverages up to our limits and sublimits. Okay, so those are the coverages that you get for the $16.15 that we pay. The most important thing I can tell you to tell your coaches is to have the injury report forms. If something happens, make sure they get filled out. Make sure the doctor fills it out, or the dentist, depending on, and it gets submitted to the branch. So it gets submitted to BC Hockey for approval. They will then submit those to us. People don't necessarily have to have the receipts for services. So if they're doing physio ongoing, get the form in. The receipts can follow, okay? But the important thing is the form within the 90 days, all right? And then we cover to our sublimits. Jim asked yesterday about a lot of minor hockey associations are hiring staff. Are they covered under Directors and Officers and Liability? They would be, as long as they are doing association business, okay, and that falls under their professional abilities. The only thing that's not in there is dishonesty insurance, okay, and that's an insurance that is sometimes secured for employees. If you were interested in that, you could contact Jeremy at BC Hockey, and that would have to be paid for. It's a different coverage. It doesn't fall under our coverage. But if you have paid employees, it's something you should look into, and you can, as I say, contact Jeremy for that. So.
And some of those employees are on a contract versus being hired as a...
Yeah, that's fine. As long as a premium is paid on their behalf, Jim, that's the key. Okay, so, I mean, when you do your list to your associations, to your branch, you just make sure that staff person is on there. So, okay. Okay, any questions? I know we can't get too far into the insurance, guys, but,
I think the thing that's, oh, go ahead.
One question, okay,
Yep.
so at the beginning of this next season,
Yep.
the kid has been carded the first year, he's covered by insurance.
Yep.
At the beginning of the next season, there's a period of time where they're trying to determine where they're gonna play,
Yeah,
what team
that's
they're gonna
fine.
play with, et
Yeah.
cetera.
Yep.
My understanding is they're covered by insurance
Yes.
from last year,
September 1 to September 1.
but summer hockey and spring hockey is just
No,
separate.
because they're not sanctioned by the branch.
Yes, I got
For
it.
something to be insured, they've got to be sanctioned by the branch. So if they're not sanctioned by the branch, they're not covered.
Any of our summer programs that we run as a minor hockey association.
As long as your branch has approved it.
That you as a minor hockey association run.
Yeah. As long as your branch has approved it, and
Yeah.
you're good to go, so.